Thank you. It's truly amazing what we could do through sustainable tourism. It's because of the students at Canyon Crest Academy who traveled that we were able to launch the Maasai Heritage, the Maasai Education Center, the new one that we just launched. The students came and worked hand in hand with the Maasai. Of course, the Maasai led the work and did 90% of the work, even more before we arrived. But we were able to be there, and through tourism, we were able to really help, through cultural tourism, bringing our students there to learn from the Maasai. And now we have this center that you see, the Maasai chiefs are actually in the center right now as we're streaming. So they're in the cultural center. So it's a huge accomplishment. I want to thank all the students. And now we would like to introduce Aaron Combs, who is also our youth ambassador for San Diego Sister Cities. He's there. He was part of the delegation from the youth delegation from San Diego. And we really just want to welcome him here. He just came back from Kenya. He then attended the United Nations Permanent Forum, just came back to class, and all of the students are also with them. So we thank you all for taking time out of school to be here with the UN meeting today. And Aaron, we're just really honored for your leadership and all of your leadership, because it's because of you that we have this center now, because of all of the students that are participating today. So I really wanted to just ask you, can you share why you think protecting the environment is important as a youth, and why this trip in Kenya was important for you? I know you termed this, that you coined this trip as the Eco Warrior team. So what does Eco Warrior mean to you? And can you please describe what Eco Warrior means with your team? So thank you.
Of course. First of all, the honor is all mine to be here speaking today about these important issues. It truly is amazing that technology has come so far as to allow us to be here in San Diego, in Kenya, and from Geneva. It's just truly amazing to be part of such an important mission globally. Growing up, I've always been passionate about the environment. My mom will tell you, when I was very young, I would sit at the dinner table and stare at the window and stare at the trees, the trees swaying in the wind for hours on end. And that really, as I got older, that morphed into a variety of areas, into advocacy, policy work, and various competitions. And it was through my branching out into environmental conservation, environmental protection, that I realized that many existing conservation programs, many existing, climate-focused programs, they had deep systemic issues that were hurting Indigenous communities. Some notable ones that I'd like to hit upon. In America, for example, right now, lithium is an important commodity that the American government is looking to use to help America electrify its electric grid. But many of our lithium resources sit on indigenous land in Nevada, and that's a conflict we see progressing in America, where the indigenous peoples are not being included in these conversations about their own land use. And this also applies to the people in Kenya, to the Maasai. Historically, actually, many of the Maasai were displaced off their land to enable the creation of national parks, of protected areas. And as Mr. Simon said earlier, the ecosystems, they include the Maasai people. So when we're displacing them, when we're moving them off their land, we're threatening the ecosystem as it is. So that's really where the term eco-warrior has morphed from. It really comes from the idea that we as people, we as youth, people who are passionate about the environment, we want to come together to devote ourselves to a fight to protect the indigenous people, to protect the Maasai, along with conservation and environmental protection. And really, after the trip, the name only became more fitting, because while we were there, we learned all about how the Maasai warriors, the Morans, how they fight to preserve peace, how they enable the protection of their environment through being warriors. And that's really how I see us as a team, what our mission is here today.
Thank you, Aaron, for sharing. Do you want to share a little bit about your personal experience in Kenya, and what did you learn from the Maasai, and what did you observe from the environment while living there and traveling there?
Absolutely. When we first landed in Kenya, Nairobi, I really didn't know what to expect. I had never been to Kenya. I had done my research, but I didn't know, what it would look like on the ground. And while I was there, I was struck by a number of things. Firstly, while we were with the Maasai, I don't think any of us, we could walk 2 steps without being swamped by people, because there was just so much warmth, an outpouring of warmth from the people who were so excited to see us there. You can go to other countries, you go to Europe, you go to Asia, and you really don't get that. You just feel like a tourist, a fish out of water in a foreign country. But the Maasai really made us feel like it was our second home, that we were welcome, that we were blessed to be there. Some other notable things I want to touch upon. Chief mentioned this earlier, but for the Maasai people, there's this overwhelming sense of collectivism. What I mean by this is that there's a lot of mutual respect, lots of sharing, lots of mutual protection among the people of the Maasai. While I was there, I remember noting down that for the Maasai people, no one eats or drinks alone. You always have to eat with somebody else, drink with somebody else, because there's such a huge emphasis on being a community, on being together, on sharing things, sharing through the best and the worst. During the recent drought, for example, many of the Maasai lost a large majority or all of their cattle. And so some of the Maasai took it upon themselves to share their cattle with those who had lost their herds. And this really serves as a model for a strong and healthy community for us here in America, how we can really learn from the Maasai and learn to encourage to facilitate community connections like those. Furthermore, even those who were struggling, because of the recent drought, there was always a deep sense of happiness, of satisfaction with their lives, even as they strove to survive and thrive in this world. And that's something I also want to take back for myself personally, to really examine the life I live and to find the small things to appreciate. Above all, the most valuable lesson I learned from the Maasai was their perspective on life and what is truly important when it comes to being on this planet. They truly have a deep appreciation for the simple things, such as family, community, and the beauty of nature. And they reminded me that happiness doesn't just come from material possessions, but from a sense of connection, from a sense of purpose. When it comes to the environment there are lots of notable things that me and some other students picked up on while we were there. I think one of the things that has really stuck with me, even as I've come back, is just how many dead carcasses were along the roads. When we drove from Nairobi to Amboseli, and while we were in Amboseli, just looking outside the window, you could see dead wildlife carcasses scattered, of wildebeest, of zebras. And while we were at the national park, we were told that they're all the result of the recent drought. You can see that many of the carcasses are quite fresh. They haven't really decomposed yet, which is evidence of how recent the devastation has been. And what's some other kind of details that really struck me was that at the peak of the drought, so many animals were dying that there was a surge in the population of scavengers, of vultures who were coming in to feed on the dead bodies. And that the smell was so strong that many of the people didn't want to be near the national park. And that serves as a stark warning for us as our world enters this period of climate change. We really need to remember the impact we have on people who are not close to us. Overwhelmingly, the climate change is being driven by developed countries like America and not by the indigenous people. Yet the indigenous people, like the Maasai, are being overwhelmingly impacted by climate change, by the effects of climate change. So this trip really served as that reminder that our day-to-day actions here in San Diego, in America, have impacts on the other side of the world. Truly on the other side of the world. Kenya is pretty much, it was a 16-hour flight to Qatar, another 5 hours south. So truly on the other side of the world, we as youth, we as students, we need to be conscious of how our actions, how our day-to-day habits are influencing these people, right? And furthermore, even as Amboseli has started to recover by the recent rains, the center also has discovered that wildlife populations have already begun to rebound. It's important to note that the people of Kenya are experiencing right now, the Maasai people, is similar to what we're experiencing here in California, which is the whiplash effect, right? You have extended periods of severe drought, and then you have short periods of intense rain. And while we were there, it did rain, and it rained very intensely. And at night, the roads were flooding. There was a lot of sediment being washed away. And it's important to note that this can be stressful for the ecosystem at large. And to enable adequate protection, to enable adequate maintenance of the ecosystem, we need to continue to involve the Maasai people within their own ecosystem. They know how the rains move. They know how the watersheds work and where the ephemeral streams are. And they know which trees are healthy, which trees aren't. And so it's critical to engage with the Maasai people as an important stakeholder in this process. just some examples of how engaging with the Maasai has benefited the ecosystem at large. Actually, within Amboseli, the edges of Amboseli National Park have far higher rates of greenery than the center. And while excuse me, and while that's partly due to natural phenomena such as soil salinization, it's also due to the fact that the Maasai herds of cows and goats, they're fertilizing the ground actually, and they're replenishing the nutrients in the soil. So when it does rain and a lot of the animal excrement washes into the national park, it enables the growth of trees and of greenery. So it demonstrates that when you integrate the Maasai people within their ecosystem, the ecosystem thrives overall. And furthermore, the park cannot support the population of animals that it does. It's too small. And so the surrounding areas are also considered as the overall biosphere, right? The UNESCO biosphere. So to enable the proper protection of the animals outside the park, the Maasai people must be engaged. It's their land, it's their rights. And so therefore, they must have a say at the table, and they must be involved in the process of planning, of land use, and of wildlife protection.
Thank you, Aaron. It's amazing. Like you said, the giraffes, now that it rained, it only rained a small little bit, and now the giraffes are walking around our center that we built. So can you share a little bit about the youth-led climate initiative that you and your friends started with Chief Sontika and the Maasai youth in Kenya? Can you share a little bit about what you just recently did in Kenya?
Absolutely. So the initiative we started is really kind of a two-step initiative, as we see. The foundation is based on technology, self-empowerment through technology. I worked with some companies to collect over 20 laptops that we brought to Kenya on our trip. And these laptops really act as the catalyst for great change, for great improvements for the Maasai people. Not only will this technology facilitate awareness of the Maasai people, but it'll enable documentation of Indigenous knowledge, of cultural practices. We'll be increasing the computer literacy for youth, which will act as a pathway for self-improvement and digital inclusion for all, which is one of the SDGs. This also enables the right to self-determination, which is one of the key tenets of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. As part of the project, we've been facilitating awareness and understanding of computer literacy through guides that we're currently working on to help the Maasai learn how to use the computers and how they'll be able to translate it into their native language to disseminate amongst their community. And this will enable each and every one of the Maasai to create their own platform from themselves to ensure that their own rights and their experiences, that their lives are being protected. I think this is particularly important because just actually yesterday, the Washington Post published an article on East Africa about the drought in East Africa, and it completely didn't discuss the indigenous people, the Maasai. And when we are bringing computers to the people, when we're enabling computer literacy, it'll enable the Maasai to advocate for themselves and to have themselves included on important pieces of journalism like this. That will lead to further awareness of their experiences, more and funding, more care about what they're doing, and overall, that'll be a catalyst for great change for the Maasai. And that kind of change is what we're building climate awareness on top of. Through technology, we're going to enable youth on both sides in San Diego and in the Maasai lands to exchange knowledge about environmental management strategies. In the U.S., we have done a lot of research into forestry, into aquatic ecology, to soil science, and by combining that with the Maasai indigenous knowledge, we can really there's a lot of opportunity for extremely effective and efficient environmental management practices. And so we can facilitate that interaction as we're doing today through technology. Furthermore, a lot of the environmental management plans drawn up by non-indigenous groups, they truly lack a lot of the necessary steps that will include indigenous groups. And so through technology, it'll enable the Maasai people to include what they need and what they see within these plans to protect their own interest and the interest of their land. Furthermore, through technology, we'll enable the Maasai people to raise awareness for what they see on the ground for the environment. While we were there, I think collectively we took many pictures of what we saw in the environment. We saw the soil salinization occurring. We saw some tree deaths as a result of the elephants eating water. We saw carcasses, right? So we see these environmental challenges, and through computers and through computer literacy, the Maasai people will be able to share these live with the rest of the world. They'll be able to document what's happening on the ground as it happens, which is critical if we want to really demonstrate to the world that this is a challenge worth solving. And I want to quote from the UN Declaration on Indigenous Rights from Article 16 that says, Indigenous peoples have the right to establish their own media in their own languages and to have access to all forms of non-Indigenous media without discrimination, ensuring full freedom of expression. We should encourage privately owned media to adequately reflect Indigenous cultural diversity. And to achieve that, Article 16, these kind of technology programs are critical to reaching that. And so it's really exciting to see what we can do now that we have laptops in Amboseli in Kenya.
Thank you, Aaron, for sharing. Really, you've done a tremendous amount of work, all of you. I guess I know you're in school and you only have a little bit more time because you have your AP exams. So I want to thank you guys for taking time out of school to attend this UN meeting. I guess in closing, can you share, how do you think this partnership and this friendship between the youth in San Diego and the youth in Kenya, and also being able to learn now directly from the chiefs, how do you think that'll impact both of our communities, and how do you think it'll benefit our city in San Diego and California?
Absolutely. So I think one of the biggest benefits that we'll see as a result of this connection is a greater empowerment of youth. Sorry. Through these kind of technological connections, we'll be able to encourage San Diegan youth to become more engaged in global issues. Because we'll be able to have this live stream of information coming in from Amboseli, Kenya, the youth will be able to feel more connected with the Maasai people. They'll be able to feel more connected with the global issues at hand. And these kind of programs will demonstrate the relevance of the struggles of the Maasai to their daily lives. Just for example, the recent drought that we face in California and the drought that the people in East Africa, the Maasai, have faced, we can use these challenges as common connections that can drive collective collaboration. And not only will San Diegan youth benefit, but Maasai youth will also benefit. We're lucky enough to be in a place where we have plenty of access to information, to education, to knowledge, and we'll be able to share this with the Maasai youth to act as the vector of information dissemination. And this will not only help drive equity when it comes to education, which is also one of the SDGs of the UN SDGs, but it'll encourage Maasai youth to pursue their dreams. While I was in Kenya, while I was with the Maasai, I met a young adult named Solomon, who is particularly, I remember him because he had a dream of coming to America to study management and communications so he could go back to Kenya and really act as a voice for the Maasai to educate the people about Maasai indigenous practices, to become an activist for the local wildlife. And while it can be very difficult to establish, to travel these days because it's very costly, but these technological connections can facilitate the necessary information sharing, the necessary information dissemination. And we also see lots of opportunities to connect the indigenous peoples of San Diego to Kumeyaay, to the Maasai. We see that, for example, the indigenous practices, the indigenous environmental practices can be shared across both areas. We're lucky enough to actually have a very, very similar environment to the Maasai. We have these periods of rains and droughts and dry seasons, and the Kumeyaay could have important skills, could have important knowledge that the Maasai could benefit from, and vice versa. And so we see that these kind of connections can really facilitate better management in both areas. Above all, connections between youth. They foster understanding, empathy, and collaboration, which are all traits necessary for avoiding future conflict and in fact driving future progress. So personally, I, along with the rest of the San Diego youth, am honored to be part of such an important, impactful mission. I think I want to call upon the rest of the youth, the rest of the youth watching and listening, to join us, to take an active role in not only preserving the Maasai culture and their way of life, but to open their minds up to learn and share with the Maasai people. Ultimately, it's all about learning. It's all about discovery and understanding. So that's what I just want to share with everybody.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you all for your tremendous amount of work. I just want to commend all the students for their sacrifices, traveling to Kenya, and of course, having this opportunity to learn from the Maasai, and thank the Maasai for welcoming them into their home and into their land to learn. We're truly grateful, and thank you for taking the time to be with us at the UN meeting. Really, we're doing tremendous work, and I feel hopeful in the next generation when I hear the youth speak about climate and about connecting our world and about becoming friends globally to solve these world issues. So really want to thank all of you.